Welcome everyone to Tales from the 90s, your retro time machine back to my favorite time period, the 1990s. On last episode, number 59, we were back in January of 1996, if I can get my facts straight. This week, we're going to episode number 60. We're going to be in January of 1997, so we're skipping ahead one full year to see how the world's changed since then. Let's go.
Viewer warning. The following program contains material that may be too intense for some viewers. Parental discretion is advised. Where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street, man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Before we get into the episode, I do want to mention a bonus episode I have. If you've never seen these before, it can be like on any random topic. It doesn't have to stick to the 90s. That's why they're bonus episodes. Anyway, for this month, I've decided, with the help of, I asked somebody on Facebook, and I got a comment from my friend Dallas, who's in the wrestling business, to talk about wrestling magazines. He's like, I don't know if you remember PWI magazines or ever read them. I was like, oh yeah. And then I got into a few stories I'll get into. I've talked about before on the podcast, but I'll get into more in depth on there about the way I went about getting these wrestling magazines, which was less than legal, but I'll get into that on that one. But anyway, it's all about wrestling magazines, from PWI to WCW, WWF magazine, old WWF Raw magazine, if you remember that one, where it tried to make it seem like a real magazine. Anyway, that'll be out on January 26th. It's the last Friday of the month, I believe. But that should be a fun one. I haven't recorded it yet, but it should be really fun to talk about all that stuff. But we're here for right now. We're here for January of 1997. Like I said, last week I was doing January of 96, and, a lot's changed in the world. We're going to start talking about TV. Speaking of changing, the television rating system went into effect. The stuff you always see. If anybody's watching this that wasn't around, in 1997, probably doesn't know of a time when you don't see a TV show coming on the screen and it says, TV MA for mature, or Y7 for kids, or TV 14. All that stuff was in movies originally, not those ratings, different ones. But these were created for TV just so that way parents knew what was on, because the way things are going in the 90s with Ren and Stimpy and all that stuff, television changing, getting more and more risque stuff. Of course, they ain't seen nothing yet with South Park came out and all that. But yeah, it was the television rating system was put into place, and to help with that, with parental stuff, they had some TVs that came out with something that's called the V-chip. It was where you can put a password in to block things, but they didn't have like a TV rating system, originally. So it was, really all you could do was block channels. Well, with this, your TV it was almost like the first version of a smart TV. The V-chip can tell, what program's coming on, and if, a parent puts in a thing where you can't watch below this rating, say TV 14 and under, they don't want their 8-year-old to watch or something, then you put in the password to block that, and any show that comes on with that is, you're not allowed to watch it. Maybe a show comes on next, it's TV PG, and they're allowed to watch it, it'll let them watch that. But anyway, and all TVs were supposed to comply with V-chip built in by the year 2000. So, and I believe they still have those, but I don't know if anybody uses them, because for one, that's normally for over-the-air antenna. I think it worked with cable too, if I'm not mistaken. But these days, most people don't have the coaxial cord plugged in. If they do have cable, it's usually hooked up by HDMI, so I don't know if that still works. It may. But of course, there was always a workaround. You could literally find the installation guide, the papers, whatever you call it, the booklet that comes with the TV, and it shows you how to reset the password if you needed to. So I never had to deal with any of that, but I guarantee if I would have found the workaround and been watching what I wanted. That's just the way I was, for better or for worse. But yeah, anyway, speaking of TV, a show that made a premiere, or cartoon I should say, which is pretty big, like ended up being pretty big worldwide, I believe. Well, I don't know about worldwide. I know countrywide it was, but it was King of the Hill. I was not a fan of Beavis and Butthead, and I was actually surprised when I found out that the same guy did that. Just because, I mean, if you look at the drawings, you can easily tell. But the material, like Beavis and Butthead, they're always watching these rock videos. King of the Hill, Hank Hill, they love country music. So it's like two different things, unless you're older and can realize that the drawings look the same. But anyway, King of the Hill premiered on Fox. They went on for 13 seasons until 2010, and they were actually brought back last year in 2025, and I believe they've already been renewed, so 2 or 3 more seasons. I haven't watched any of it yet to tell if because they weren't as bad as like some of like The Simpsons or anything, or South Park would be, as far as like the material or the so-called not PC stuff. But there was some stuff on there, that they probably can't do these days. So it'll be interesting to go back and watch that and see, if it still looks and feels the same, even if they take some stuff out, or if it's like super noticeable, like, okay, they're trying to make this 2020s series instead of back in the 90s. But anyway, I haven't seen every episode of King of the Hill, but I've seen a bunch of them. I mean, for a time there was, Simpsons and King of the Hill. I can't remember which one was first. I want to say Simpsons was always the lead in, but maybe King of the Hill was, or they switched at times. I can't remember, but Sunday nights at 8 and 8:30, those were appointment viewing times back when that happened, before the days of DVRs and streaming and all that stuff. But another show that premiered, it was kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, just because it's like not something that I normally would watch, was a soap opera called Sunset Beach. And I remember watching this during the summer, obviously, because, first of all, it only ran for 3 seasons, but it had 755 episodes. Because soap operas is, every day. I don't know if I'm sure there's days where they don't have the episode, or there's days off, or, they show reruns, but a lot of it is, 5 days a week, every week. You look at stuff like soap operas and like, but I mean, they got to come up with, stories to continue. And like I said, 755 episodes over 3 seasons. I can't imagine how grueling that is to film and to write for that, and the actors to be there and have to, produce enough. I mean, it almost seems like they're working every day, it seems like, because they got, 5 days a week, anyway, I never understood, like, the amount of stuff that would go into that until you stop and think. But anyway, I only watched it during the summer because obviously I was in school during the regular weekdays when it was on. I remember it was like 11 in the morning. I don't know, I was just on, because it was a time we didn't have cable, I think. And I just was just watching it and kind of got drawn into the story. I don't know if I can go back and ever watch any of these, but I'd like to see where it started and, to see the whole thing through. But yeah, Sunset Beach, is not one that's really talked about because it didn't last long, but it certainly drew me in. But another show that started that's still actually going these days is Antiques Roadshow on PBS. And I never, faithfully watched this, but I did catch it every once in a while, and it was like a huge thing in pop culture. It became where, they would parody it on other shows. People would take stuff in, and it looked like this old painting, worth 5 cents. They're like, it is $2 million. And then someone think they got something monumental, and it's like, oh, it's only worth $20. Oh, I think I'll keep it. But yeah, see, I script out a show as far as script, word for word, but topics I want to talk about and a couple facts. But that actually, talking about that on PBS and just discovering it one day, like with Sunset Beach, I want to talk about the time that I discovered the greatness that is Mr. Bean on PBS. It was on our local PBS. I think it was 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday. Just happened to be going through the channels, and normally PBS is only something that kids would watch during the morning or the day. The nighttime is normally the stuff for old people, we thought, because of all the British shows. Well, I'd probably seen Mr. Bean before, just flipping through the channel, not even stopping. But something made me stop, and it was one of the genuinely most funniest things me and my brother Josh, and I don't remember if Travis was watching, but he might have been, had ever seen it at the time. I don't remember the exact episode, but I think it was the one where, it might have been the one where he was on the plane where he did the gag where, you know, he was trying to make the kid laugh next to him. The kid ends up throwing up in the barf bag, and then Mr. Bean doesn't know it, and he gets the barf bag, blows it up, it goes like this. And then there's one where he's on the train, and there's this guy sitting in the, you know, the car with him, and is laughing and is driving Mr. Bean crazy. He like puts his tie and gum in his ear so you don't have to hear the guy laugh. And then there's also, I could go on all day with these, but I'm trying to remember. I don't remember which exact one I watched. There's also the memorable one where he's always like petty. So if you've never seen Mr. Bean before, Rowan Atkinson, he is mostly silent during it. He'll say a few things, but it's mostly just silent comedy of him being stupid. Like, I think there's a theory that he's like an alien or something, especially with the beginning of the show where it almost looks like a spaceship drops him out of the sky. Like, almost like he's some kind of alien or something. But he gets so petty sometimes. Like in this one that I remember well, he's at the park just sitting on the bench, and some guy gets out of like a little drink and a little sandwich, you know, having lunch. Well, Mr. Bean's got to be all fancier than that. He pulls out this whole thing and makes tea in a sock. And this guy's got like, I don't know, probably like a tuna fish sandwich. Mr. Bean brings out a live fish, and he's going like this in his hand, and he went, smacks it to the side of the bench, and it's like, I don't know if you're getting the humor is like coming across, but just watch these. I don't know if they're on YouTube or not. I got the DVD set of them. Of course, everybody's probably more familiar with the 1997, well, actually this year, I think, movie Mr. Bean or Bean. It's made it in the United States. It was, you know, Mr. Bean comes over to the U.S. and the thing with Whistler's mother and the painting. The movie's great. I'm not saying it's not, but most people are probably only familiar with that. And he does a couple of his bits in that, like the one with the turkey. He puts a turkey, ends up with a turkey on his head. It's even funnier in the TV series. Like, this series has to be watched. It is hilarious. It never gets old to me. Absolutely love it. But there was a show that ended this month. It was a cartoon, actually. It was the Mighty Ducks, the animated series. It only aired for one season on Saturday morning cartoons on ABC. And I know there's a lot of cartoons based on movie series. This one took the Mighty Ducks literally. Like, they weren't, it wasn't just the kids, because you figure, that wouldn't last very long. Just was the kids going to play a game every week on the thing, or have them do other hockey. No, this was actual like mutant. I don't know exactly what they were called. Ducks, like literal ducks playing hockey. Because of course they had to cartoon it up. But yeah, that ended after only. Seems like it was on some of these shows when you're kids. You feel like they've been on for years, but it turns out it was only on for one season. But of course with reruns and everything else, as a kid you don't realize you're seeing reruns. But as an adult you're like, oh, this one again. But anyway, talk a little bit about books. Goosebumps '97 was everywhere. The series had come out, I believe, '95, and Goosebumps was huge. I mean, it pretty much made Scholastic what it was. Of course, the Scholastic Book Fair, everybody was going to it, but it wasn't as huge of a deal until Goosebumps came out, and then everybody wanted Goosebumps. Of course, and the picture of the cars that all the boys wanted. I'm not sure what the girls wanted. But, there was always this stuff. I could never afford anything at the Scholastic Book Fair. I just went there. It was fun to look, but I always like, I want Goosebumps. Might be able to afford a pencil. That's about it. But anyway, Goosebumps was on this, actually, 51st book, Beware the Snowman. I've never actually read this, but I remember seeing the cover a lot, the demented-looking snowman. And I don't believe this was ever made into the TV series. This is kind of when Goosebumps, the original series, was kind of winding down. But they did have a couple other series. The Give Yourself Goosebumps, I've mentioned that on here many times before. It's like the Choose Your Own Adventure books. They were on number 13 at the time. Scream of the Evil Genie. I've never read it because I'm actually... I think I read like the 6th or 7th book first of this series within the past few months. And I was like, you know what? I want to go from the beginning. Obviously, you don't have to because they're not like... in certain order where you have to read them, but I just wanted to go from the beginning. Anyway, currently I'm on book number 5, Night in Werewolf Woods. I've read through once. Of course, I've died. And those well, they don't say you die, but you basically die. And those, there's a lot of bad endings and very few good endings. It keeps you reading, you know. You want to, and then you want to try to get to every ending. And then another series they had was called Goosebumps Presents. Like I said, the TV show was pretty huge, so they actually were re-releasing books that were already out, but including photos from the series. So that was your, hook to get them. Whether you already had the book and you were a really big fan of Goosebumps or the series and you wanted the book with the pictures from the actual TV show, or if you'd never gotten the book before, hey, I remember this episode because you see the picture. But anyway, the book was released. Who am I getting a call from? One of many spam numbers that called me every freaking day. Anyway, they were on number 8 at the time. Be Careful What You Wish For, which is, of course, not the 8th Goosebump book ever, but the 8th one in this series. But kind of a natural progression, moving from Goosebumps to the kids' meal toys section that I always like to talk about. What was out when Happy Meals, as of course everybody knows them as Happy Meals, but only McDonald's is Happy Meal. But Happy Meal had something out called the Nickelodeon Tangle Twistazoids. I don't remember anything like this on Nickelodeon, so if it was a show, the Tangle or Twistazoids, whatever, I think it was just a way to get Nickelodeon branding onto their Happy Meals, honestly. Because they were these like twisty creature toys that you could connect to the other ones if you got. And there was a set of 8 of them, so you're obviously encouraged to buy more Happy Meals, or your parents were, and get all the toys so you can connect them all. But Burger King at the time had M&M candy dispensers, and there was a set of obviously there were candy dispensers that dispensed M&Ms, but they weren't like the Pez dispensers. They were those the M&M characters that were famous in the commercials. The green one was the female one. I think that was, I don't remember how new it was, but I knew it was fairly new. But anyway, some of them had wheels, like vehicles. Some of them were just, the actual characters with feet. But I don't know exactly, but I'm assuming you got some M&Ms with it. That would be sucky if you just got the dispenser and it'll give you a little bit of M&Ms to start with. They didn't look like they could hold that much. Like, I don't even know if they could hold a full package of M&Ms. Sorry, I keep rubbing my eye. About that eye infection I've had. I'm like constantly making sure nothing is filling up in there because I do not want to go through that again. Hopefully I'll have a surgery in a few months or something. Get that taken care of. But anyway, Wendy's had something called the Club Cave. It was the set of like 4 toys that were like if an archaeologist would find these, like there was like dinosaur bones and stuff you'd find in like a cave. There was like a sundial, I guess, that they discovered from ancient times or something. You never could tell with these toys for these kid meals, what they're going to be. They could be based on, cartoons, which a lot of them were, or just, a random idea like that, But KFC had toys based on the TV show Beakman's World. And a lot of people remember that. A lot of people were more fans of Bill Nye the Science Guy. I know I always mention this, but I was a big fan of Mr. Wizard for Mr. Wizard's World on Nickelodeon. That show had been on the air since like the 60s. But I always learned science the most from him. And I know Beakman's World and Bill Nye were like all over the place. You figured it'd appeal to me. But no, I liked Mr. Wizard's World. He was more calm. I could understand things better. Taco Bell had the Star Wars trilogy cups and toys. I'm not a Star Wars fan at all, really. So that wouldn't have interested me. But, always cool when these places come out with collector's cups. Speaking of, I got a Taco Bell cup right here. It looks old, but it's new. It was that Decades menu they came out with last year. 2025. I always say last year. You might be watching this in 2029, 2059. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, 2025 they came out with the Decades menu, and I got the cup. I know it's not from then, but it's the design, so who cares? I can't. You probably find that online for like $50 a cup from back in the 80s. I think that was the 80s or maybe 70s. I think 80s. Anyway, Taco Bell certainly don't look like it used to. Used to look like a fun place to go. Now it looks like a freaking office building. God, they suck. Sorry, get me going on the design that they're doing of modern restaurants like them and McDonald's and all of them. Just White Castle better never change, I tell you that. Or Skyline. KFC's changed a little bit, but at least they've got the colors. But anyway, Hardee's during '97. Of course, this was the year that they got bought out by Carly Jr. So I don't know. In January, they were probably still the good old Hardee's. They had something called the Animobiles. There was a set of cars with animals on them, and there was just the most random things. Like there was a snake, a cat, a dinosaur, an alligator, and a dolphin. They were just. Did they just pick out of a hat what animal they're going to put in a vehicle? But anyway, I said earlier that last week I was talking about January of '96, and January of '97. Like I said, what a difference a year makes. And last year, on the last episode, I was talking about starting 6th grade and, the experience. And, of course, in January, you're in the middle of the school year. So I wasn't exactly starting 6th grade, but it was, it was 6th grade. It was, my first year in middle school. And, but next year in '97, I was, I passed the 6th grade, obviously. But '97 was really the year, well, the end of '96 to '97. That I just, things are getting really bad at home. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I try to rationalize in my mind why I do things the way I did. I talked about it a few weeks ago on my, I think it was March '99 episode, when some of the stuff that I did that, was, against the law. I was just say it was kind of bad. It was against the law, and, but, trying to rationalize in my head why I did these things. Of course, I was, at this time, I was 13, so, you're starting the teen years, you're starting all the puberty stuff. I don't know exactly when that started for me. It was I had a calendar. But, so you're starting those changes there, and then just things are getting really bad at home. Marky Foe, my stepdad from hell, was being more abusive. Basically just... that I don't want to get too much into it, but the abuse is getting worse. The controlling of him, of everybody, my mom included, was getting worse by him. And I kind of just zoned out. And you think maybe I would focus at school or something, but I just kind of just stopped caring about things other than watching wrestling or listening to music. That was about, and watching TV, that was about it. And, getting to watch TV was, very rare at this time. I'd have to, sneak and do it. Even sneak and listen to the radio. And just, like I said, a lot of things are happening. I think this is around the time where the incident where Marky Foe told it, he's dead now, but tells it differently than me. I was in there washing dishes, because, freaking never-ending chore around the house to this day still. But anyway, at least I'm not forced to do it here. I'm just forced by being an adult. It's a different force. As a kid, as an adult, I gotta do this. But anyway, I was washing the dish. He was mad about something and came in and freaking kicked the plate into my freaking head, kicked it up in the air. It was still in my hand, it's hard to explain. It was this glass plate, and the ones from the '90s, them heavy freaking suckers. Well, I was, holding it kind of, you can't see on the camera, kind of, midsection, I guess, to my side, while I was listening to him ramble on about something he was whining about, or I supposedly did, and maybe I did do it, I don't know. But he kicked it, and it was still in my hand, and it was almost like I, what I mean, almost would look like a comedy where I cracked it over my own head, but I clearly didn't. And you can't see it now, but I've got a scar, and I still got an indentation, and a scar from where this thing cut me open. But he tells it as he was mad, and he was going to show me, and I was holding the plate over my head, why would I be holding it like this? And he wanted to show me how high he could kick, and he kicked it, and whatever. The guy was tall, but he wasn't tall enough to kick over my head. I was probably 5 foot something at the time. Anyway, anything to get out of I'm not trying not to go in too much of that, but just things were getting bad. and not being able to go anywhere, not being able to hang out with, new friends that I've made at school. And it just, I stopped caring. Long story short here, I ended up failing this year and having to repeat the 7th grade. And like I said, I'm not trying to put all the blame on that. It was, a lot of me just not doing the work. That's what a lot of people fail for. I mean, there's obviously people that don't know stuff, and nowadays they have all these IEPs that help people, and that's good. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It was a different time then. Like, people that didn't know things, they were called stupid by everybody and failed the grade. I failed just because I wasn't doing the work. If I'd applied myself the way I did later on in college and everything, even though some people think it's, whoop, there goes my Taco Bell cup. Let's see if I can get it. Use my shoe to get it. I don't normally have this bucket here with the stuff on it. Normally it's up on the shelf, but I just wanted to show some of my stuff on here. It's a nice little background. But anyway, some idiot accused me of my paper or my college degrees not being worth toilet paper or whatever the hell that idiot said. Anyway, I'm done with him. But anyway, if I'd applied myself, I could have really done a lot. But stupidly, I didn't. And like I said, not trying to give excuses. I'm trying to figure out why, I didn't actually, just do this work when it would have been something to do other than 50,000 chores and everything else. I was probably reading wrestling magazines, honestly. But anyway, moving on from that, I do want to talk about a movie that came out this month that was funny. I haven't seen it in a while. Beverly Hills Ninja. It was not one of Chris Farley's better movies, like as far as like, I wouldn't put it as my top 1 or 2. But it was still hilarious. Obviously my top 2, Tommy Boy being number 1, Black Sheep number 2. But I would put this third. He's like a long lost kid. He's like this. He's like called. I think they call him the Great White Ninja or something. But it's got. I believe it's got Chris Rock in it. And he end up going to Beverly Hills, and it's just hilarious. Like I said, I haven't seen it in a few years, but it's the one movie that came out this month that I really enjoyed. I believe I probably seen it close to when it came out. We probably got it from. We didn't normally go to Blockbuster. It's usually Hollywood Videos is where we usually went. Everybody's like, Blockbuster, we didn't go to Blockbuster too much. It was mostly Hollywood Videos where we went. It was, it's a national chain, but it was the local store. And I think it was just because the prices were cheaper. Music this week, of course, we always go and look at the Billboard charts and the American Country Countdown charts. Church? I can't talk. Not church. Charts. Anyway, I was not listening to pop music at this time, but there was a song that was a pretty big hit for Toni Braxton. Of course, I know the name, and know the face, but, couldn't pick any of her songs out. This is the only song I've ever heard of by her, Unbreak My Heart, and I only know that, I've only heard that, line. I haven't even heard the whole chorus, and, this isn't any knock on her or pop music or anything. It's just, I wasn't listening to it at this time. Fast forward 2 years from now, and then that's when I started listening to pop music. But anyway, it was number 1 for all of January, the whole month of December prior to that, and most of February, so 11 weeks at the top. And again, this is a song that I've never even listened to, so, yeah, I was firmly listening to country music at the time. Absolutely loved 90s country. Number 1 for 1 week was the song by LeAnn Rimes, One Way Ticket, and instead of parentheses, Because I Can. Songs have weird titles. You can't just put the whole title there. I got to put it in parentheses. But anyway, LeAnn Rimes was, I think, a year older than me, maybe like a year and a half, possibly 2 at the most. So, there's definitely someone my age that, or, close to my age as a famous singer was really cool. But, of course, we all had crushes on her and everything. She came out with that first song she came out with, Blue, sounded like she was straight out from the 60s. And, of course, I love music from that time, country music from that time period. So, to me, it was like wow. And then to find out she was 14 when that came out. I can't remember how old I was then. But that was just the control of someone's voice at 14. I didn't start to be able to sing to halfway decent, in my opinion, until I was late 30s. She's at 14, different level, But yeah, the One Way Ticket was a really good song. Number 1 for 3 weeks, and also 1 week in February, so 4 weeks total, which is pretty big on the country charts. You don't really see multi-week number ones because it's so competitive, but was a song called Nobody Knows by Kevin Sharp. Now, I believe this was a R&B hit. I don't know if it was before or after this. I don't know which one was released first, but this is the only, I'd heard it. I think it was the Tony Rich Project that put out that song, Nobody Knows. I've heard it later on, and it's pretty good, but I definitely love this version the most. Kevin Sharp was, I believe he had cancer or had beaten it at one point, but I know he ended up dying. I can't remember when he died, but it wasn't like close to this, but it also wasn't 20 years later or something. But I just remember him coming out with that song. My favorite song by him is probably Seashell Shores by the Shore Church. I can't even do that. Why have a podcast if you can't talk? Anyway, She's Sure Taking It Well was my favorite song of his. I don't know if it was a number 1 or not. But anyway, this is his biggest song, and I think it was his first song, right out of the gate with the number 1. Really loved his voice. He wasn't like the typical country singer. He didn't wear a cowboy hat. He's bald from his cancer treatments, but he didn't wear a cowboy hat. He didn't have the normal country twang voice, but still, there was still on the radio at country at this time, it was diverse without being out there diverse to where it's rap and not country like it is today. There was room for diversity on country as long as it sounded country. That's the difference. People today criticize modern country music like, oh, you don't like diversity. No, I like diversity. I just want it to sound like the format it's going to be sounding like to be called that. Otherwise, just call it what it is, pop music. Anyway, that's my old man rant on current music for the week. We're going to move on and look at a Nickelodeon lineup. I've been doing the Saturday mornings the last 2 or 3 weeks. Figure I'll take a break and see what's on during the weekday on Nickelodeon. And like I said, during this time, I don't remember if I had cable or not. But we're going to look at January 20th lineup for Nickelodeon. Like I said, it was a Monday. And of course, we always start at midnight, so we're getting Nick at Night. We got Rhoda, Phyllis. I've never watched those. It's just funny. It's just, let's put on a bunch of shows with women's first names, not even give them a last name. We got the Betty White Show. I believe that was that a classic show, or was that one that they came out with for... I'm going to look this up real quick, because I don't know if this is one of those ones they came out with, because I believe they had TV Land out at the time, which was, of course, a whole channel of Nick at Night stuff, which I think nowadays they just show stuff from the freaking 2000s. It's not even classic. Yes, took my computer that long. Just trying to see if this was a classic show. No, it says 1952 TV series. And then there's one from 1977 series. Yeah, the first one was a daytime talk show in 52, so it was probably the 77 series. So it was a classic show. Never seen that on Nick at Night before, though. Then we got Happy Days, one of my favorite classic shows. Then from 2 to 4, we get the wonderful paid programming, if you guys remember that. I believe they still have that these days. It's just not a lot of people watch cable channels. And a lot of them just have 24-hour programming anymore. Back then, they had the paid programming where there'd just be infomercials for half-hour or hour-long infomercials, selling whatever the latest product is. And of course, back in the 80s and before, you would get the national anthem when the TV channel went off the air, and then it'd just be like a test pattern, like the multicolor thing on the TV. But paid programming, it started before then, but it was really in the 90s, the overnight stuff, from 2 to whatever, in this case 2 to 4, when that really started. And now, like I said, nowadays, most of it's just 24-hour programming. Then at 4, we got one of my favorites, the Munsters. Of course, I mentioned last week I would always watch the Munsters at from 6 to 7. Well, part of the one from 6:30 to 7, because I was normally getting ready to leave then. But I would sit on the register, the heat register, in the morning, especially this time in January, with my bowl of cereal, watching the Munsters on TBS with the blanket over me, to keep the heat in. I remember that so well. But anyway, here on TV Land, it was on at 4. Then Then we got Taxi, the Dick Van Dyke Show. Then at 5:30, a little earlier than it used to be on. It used to be on at 6, but we got Mr. Wizard's World, which I'd talked about before, one of my favorites. Then at 6, we got Blue's Clues, followed by Little Bear, 2 great Nick Jr. shows. I love those. Then at 7, my brother Josh's favorite, Wienerville, a puppet show hosted by Mark Wiener. I have to say it like that, Wiener. You're like, Wienerville, Wienerville, Wienerville. 7:30, Alvin and the Chipmunks. I love that freaking cartoon so much. Then we got from 8 to 9, Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. Classic, what more can you say there? Then at 9, we start the Nick Jr. portion of the day, because, you know, us regular kids are in school. We got Rugrats, which, of course, is shown on regular Nickelodeon, too. But, you know, that just shows the age range that Rugrats, you know, teenagers loved it. You know, preteens, tweens, whatever you want to call that time period of age, whatever. Younger kids and preschoolers. Everybody loved Rugrats. And then at 9:30, The Busy World of Richard Scarry. Based on the Richard Scarry is the author. It's not Scary. It's just his last name is Scary. But based on the books, and then it was it was originally a Showtime series. You know, when they were trying to do like stuff in the morning for kids. You know, kids watch Showtime during this time. Don't watch it at night. But I love The Busy World of Richard Scarry. Rupert, another great cartoon. Muppet Babies, all-time classic there. Then Allegra's Window at 11, one of the newer Nick Jr. shows at the time, followed by Gullah Gullah Island. Those two came out the same, I believe they premiered the same day. Gullah Gullah Island was always my favorite out of those two, but they were both good. Then we got Little Bear again, because, you know, Little Bear is definitely Nick Jr. Based on the books. I freaking love that cartoon. Blue's Clues again, you know, that when people think of Nick Jr., Blue's Clues is probably one of the first things they think of. Then we got the Busy World of Richard Scarry again. Papa Beaver's Story Time. I never really watched that one. And then we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon again. You know, because we're starting the afternoon now. The kids are starting to get home from school. We got Beetlejuice the series, which I loved. Tiny Toon Adventures, classic 90's right there. Muppet Babies again. Another episode of Alvin and the Chipmunks. 4:30, we got Inspector Gadget. Man, I love that cartoon. One of my first favorite things I ever watched on Nickelodeon. Then at 5, we got Are You Afraid of the Dark? Which, of course, is normally a Snick show for the new ones, but once they got enough episodes, they started showing them during the day. This was The Tale of the Door Unlocked, which I'm not ringing a bell off the top of my head, but I guarantee I've seen it. Then we got another Nicktoon, Rocko's Modern Life. Crazy cartoon. Then at 6, Clarissa Explains It All. I've seen a lot of memes recently like Clarissa still ain't explained nothing. But one of those shows that just, one of those Nickelodeon teen shows like Hey Dude and Salute Your Shorts that I absolutely loved. Then we got Tiny Toon Adventures again. Another great Nicktoon with Doug, one of the first 3. The first 3 Nicktoons, by the way, were Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy. Speaking of Rugrats, that's on next. Then at 8, we got Hey Arnold, which I was never really a fan of. I know that's a lot of people's favorites from the 90's. I never really got into it. And then at 8:30, we turn it back over to Nick at Night. We got Happy Days, I Love Lucy, The Munsters, Mary Tyler Moore Show, Rhoda, Taxi, and The Odd Couple. So yeah, Nickelodeon was over at 8:30 by then, except for the weekends, obviously. Well, Saturday, I should say. And Friday probably went a little bit longer, too. But yeah, kids were supposed to stop watching TV around 8:30, you know, get your bath, get your shower, get ready for bed, and get to bed for school. But I do want to mention the TGIF lineup, because I always talk about that when I talk about the Nickelodeon lineup, or Saturday morning cartoons if I do that. I don't do those every week, but normally I do a Nickelodeon one every week. But TGIF Family Matters was in the 8th season, and it was actually their last season on ABC. The next year they moved to CBS, and that was the last year that not only Family Matters on ABC, but the last year, you know, Family Matters was the #1 show for TGIF, which had been for years at that point. Boy Meets World was in their 4th season, 4 out of 7, so they're kind of in the middle there. There was a classic episode this month where Mr. Feeney was out of town, so Sean gets this bright idea to start a bed and breakfast at Feeney's house to make some money, and of course Corey goes along with it, unwillingly at first, but he still goes along with it. And of course, all these people come over, and he comes back early. I think he was at a trip in Boston, which he randomly ran into Eric there, and they both didn't know the other was there. And the show's set in Philadelphia, so it's not like it's 5 minutes away. But yeah, Feeney came back early, and of course they got busted. They weren't going to get through that without getting busted. And the third show on was Sabrina the Teenage Witch. That was their 1st season. Of course, that was a huge show. They ended up having 6 more seasons. And then the final show for TGIF was Clueless. They were on season 1 of 3. The first season was on TGIF, and then the next 2 would move over to the WB. Of course, that's based on that early 90s classic teen movie Clueless with Alicia Silverstone. I think that's where she became a big actress. For a while she was the number 1 actress in Hollywood, it seemed like. But yeah, I never watched the series. I've seen the movie, obviously. And there was also a show that was on Saturday mornings that I do want to talk about before I move on. From 96 to 97 for 1 season. That was Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House. Of course, everybody knows I'm obsessed with Tales from the Crypt. I from ever first seeing the TV show, and then my dad got me the comic book. Well, I should say first I'd seen the British movie from the 70s. I had never seen The Vault of Horror, the sequel to that, until much later. I now own it, and I love that one too. But that British movie from the 70s, Tales from the Crypt. I didn't know anything. It was based on any comic books or anything. I just knew it was a scary movie. And then the TV series came out in '89, and first time I seen that, I was freaking hooked. And then my dad got me the comic books. They were the reprints of the 50s, but they came out in the early 90s. I actually own some of those now, along with my archives of the old ones. I'm on the 4th volume of the Tales from the Crypt, the complete EC archives. Each one has 6 editions of the comic book in it. It's really cool. Anyway, like I said, fell in with the comic book. The movies had been out at this time. Demon Knight was really good. Bordello of Blood was kind of, it was silly, but it still had some scary moments. And then, of course, the cartoon had come out, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, kind of bridged the gap, because they obviously knew kids loved the Crypt Keeper, but some kids weren't allowed to watch it, obvious reasons. Even though by this time they'd had it on syndication where they cut all the nudity out and some of the violence, the over-the-top violence and gore. But still, a lot of parents wouldn't let their kids watch it. But Tales from the Crypt Keeper was, TVY7, I believe. Well, I don't think... later on, they would rate it that when they show reruns. But, when it was on, it didn't have... If it did have a rating, I don't know what it was. Anyway, that classic cartoon, where there was a cartoon Crypt Keeper. They made him green and not as scary looking. So little kids wouldn't be scared. But, anyway, that all led to a game show called Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House, where they used the actual Crypt Keeper puppet, but, he was, there was no, actual violence. It was sort of like a Nick Arcade type game show, where you could actually go into, virtual reality. There'd be stuff on the screen that, they'd be looking at a green screen there, but we at home would see, monsters and stuff. And the Crypt Keeper would be telling jokes, but he was you could tell he wasn't there. Now you can tell. As a kid, you don't know that he wasn't there. It was just all filmed and put into the show. He wasn't in it a whole lot. He would just, every once in a while, they would cut to him and he'd make some remark about something. You could tell it was generic. He wasn't actually, watching the show and addressing the kids. But still, as kids, you don't know. It's Crypt Keeper game show. We don't realize how little of the Crypt Keeper is actually in this game show. And they should have had it I wish they would have made it to where they made a replica of his house and you had to go down. My voice broke there. House? You go down into his crypt and you got to just, find a way to get through all different rooms and stuff. I can believe they could have done a lot more with it. It was just a cheap Universal Studios production. I believe if it had been on Nickelodeon and a couple years earlier, they would have really went all out with it. But it was still good for what it was. Do have a couple more things to talk about. I keep hitting this freaking bucket. I do want to talk about hide my little bucket, Colonel Man. Anyway, talk about some sports. NFL's playoffs were going on at the time, of course, from the '96 season. And this is actually the first season of the Baltimore Ravens. Of course, I talked about that last week, how the owner of the Browns wanted to move the team to Baltimore, but because of so much backlash and Cleveland being such a historic team, that the NFL decided that Cleveland was actually going to keep the name of the Browns and the colors and the actual history of the team, and would have a team no later than 99. I believe they came back in 99. It might have been 98, but I think 99. But anyway, the Ravens were basically, even though they were moving with the players and the coaches and everything, they were basically starting a whole new franchise. Well, we know they'd have a ton more success than the Browns. If they could have stayed in Cleveland, Ohio might have a freaking first Super Bowl. We're still waiting on one. Certainly ain't coming from the Bengals. Anyway, and this was actually the final season of the Houston Oilers, which I missed so much. It was one of the classic teams I remember as a kid. But they moved to Tennessee. They became the Tennessee Oilers at first, but eventually, of course, as you know, would become the Tennessee Titans. The Bengals finished this year tied with the Oilers for third place in the old AFC Central, 8-8. So they did better than they did last year, or this year. The year I'm recording this, Bengals finished 6-11. And freaking old Mike Brown that owns the Bengals still didn't fire Zach Taylor. He's keeping him for another year. I hope we get some defense. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, back to 1997. This is the playoffs started, like I said, and this is actually the second year in the league of the Panthers and the Jaguars, and they were expansion teams, and both teams actually made it to the championship game to get to the Super Bowl. Of course, they both lost, but still, pretty good after just being in the league 1 year. Speaking of that, Jaguars beat the Bills. The Steelers destroyed the Colts in the wild card round. Division round, the Jaguars upset the number 1 seed, Denver Broncos, and the number 2 seed, the Patriots, easily defeated the Steelers. Good. I was hoping they'd lose last night, didn't make the playoffs, but they beat the Ravens. One of the few times I ever cheer for the Ravens. Anyway, the AFC Championship game, the Patriots defeated the Jaguars 20-6, and this was pre-Tom Brady Patriots, by the way. So this is before they became the dynasty. The NFC wild card round, the Cowboys killed the Panthers, or not killed the Panthers, destroyed the Vikings. Sorry, I was skipping ahead a line. The Cowboys destroyed the Vikings. The 49ers shut out the Eagles, and in the division round, the number 2 seed Panthers beat the Cowboys. Packers easily defeated the 49ers. And in the NFC Championship game, the Packers killed the Panthers. And then the Super Bowl 31 was, of course, held in the Superdome in New Orleans, and the Packers defeated the Patriots that year, 35-21. Of course, like I said, pre-Tom Brady. He would get there, and of course, they would become the team. They're back in the playoffs, I think, for the first time since Brady left them this year, but don't feel like they're going to go very far. My prediction for this year, but in case anybody want to know, is I'm picking the Cowboys and the Jaguars, I think, is the teams I pick. Or, no, not Jaguars, the Broncos, I think. Not the what did I say, Cowboys? Somebody hit me. I almost said a word that would get me banned. Somebody hit me in the head. Cowboys definitely did not make it. I meant to say Packers. I'm picking the Packers over the Broncos in the Super Bowl. That's just my prediction. Anyway, a little bit about college football. Ohio State defeated Arizona State 20-17 in the Rose Bowl. And just looking at the history and knowing everything now, just the NCAA, college football, whatever you want to call it, their championships and everything are just so, it's so stupid. And it continues now. But, you listen to this, okay? Ohio State was ranked second. You would think that I think Florida State was first. You would think that would be the matchup for the championship. But no, they had this thing at the time, one of their many things they change all the time, the Bowl Alliance. And the Big Ten wasn't a part of the Bowl Alliance. So because their conference wasn't a part of that alliance, Ohio State didn't even get to play for the championship. They got stuck in the freaking Rose Bowl. And, even though they were second. It's so stupid. Anyway, Florida State ended up winning the championship. Not that it matters. But, I mean, that stuff continues today. Like, now they got the playoff system in place, which is good. But it seems like the teams that, outside of, I think, Indiana and maybe one other, every team that is a high-ranked team that gets a bye week, it's supposed to be a good thing, ends up being almost what finishes them off because they're sitting, like I think Ohio State this year was, we were ranked second. We were first until Indiana beat us the last game of at the Big Ten Championship, which good for them. But, Indiana, I think, is on one or maybe two that actually won with a bye week because we were sitting for 25 days. Obviously they weren't doing nothing. I'm not putting it all on that. They should have been ready for University of Miami, whatever it's called, Miami U, whatever. The ones that act like they've done something and they haven't won anything in the last 20 years, and all of a sudden they think they're something. But anyway, we should have been better prepared. But still, 25 days is a long time between games. They really should come up with some kind of different system. But at least it's a playoff system. Back then, you're not part of this little thing we made up, so who cares if you were the number 2 team in the country? You don't get a chance. Imagine that being the NFL this year. Like, telling the second best record in the whole league, not even just the conference, the whole league, like, sorry, you're not part of our little club over here, so you can't make it. Goodbye. Anyway, moving on out of that, I want to talk about a couple food items that came out in January of '97. Last week I talked about them testing the, what do they call it at the time? The Burger King Supreme, which, I told you eventually would become the Big King, which was basically a knockoff of the Big Mac, obviously, but using, their own sauce with, a spin on supposed to be the Big Mac sauce. I guess they were supposed to be similar. I don't know. I've never tried it. But if they were, you got to think that Burger King should have won that war because their burgers are flame broiled. Love the taste of Burger King burgers over any other ones. But anyway, they released that Big King this month. And not to be outdone, McDonald's said, "Hold my McRib." Instead of beer, get it? I'm really funny. Not. Anyway, they began testing their Big and Tasty, which was basically their answer to Burger King's Whopper because, Burger King was ripping their Big Mac off. Those two went at it forever, but really they have their own, there's good things about both. If I had to pick, like, which one, if I could only have one, couldn't have the other ever again, if I had to pick one, I would probably pick Burger King, honestly. Love the rodeo burgers. I hadn't tried their original chicken sandwich, believe it or not, which has been out for a long time, since until like last year, and oh god, I love that sandwich. Anyway, you can tell I love sandwiches. But another thing that came out this month was Pizza Hut released the pizza called The Edge, which was a thin crust pizza, and it was called The Edge. There's toppings to the edge, because with the regular crust pizza, it stopped at the crust. But it was a thin crust pizza, and people today are like, okay, every restaurant has that. And they do, but at this time they didn't. It was only it was supposed to be made like the local pizza taverns, where they would, make their own pizza there, and it'd usually be thin crust. That wasn't a national pizza chain thing to do, them or Domino's or Papa John's or whatever, they were the first one one of the big pizza restaurants to release a thin crust pizza. Like I said, nowadays, you can get that pretty much on any menu, Little Caesars included, I think, because I've had their thin crust pizza too. But anyway, last thing I want to talk about on here is wrestling, and we got kind of a little bit to talk about. We'll start with ECW's Supercard. Of course, it would be in, I think, April, they had their very first pay-per-view, but this is still pre-pay-per-view days when they would have a big event, and then they would show it over a couple weeks of TV. But this was called House Party. House Party, isn't that funny? It's called House Party. It was the second event, the second house party, I should say. January 11th from the ECW arena. And like I said, it aired over 2 weeks of TV, which is how ECW did things at the time. This show actually saw the reformation of the Triple Threat, which was Shane Douglas's, because he was always so obsessed with Ric Flair. You know, oh, they got the Four Horsemen. I'm going to come up with the Triple Threat. Anyway, the original Triple Threat was Shane Douglas, Dean Malenko, and Chris Benoit. But on this night, when they reformed it, because this is after Shane Douglas came back from his disastrous WWF run as Dean Douglas. But this version was, you know, Shane with Francine, of course, Chris Candido, and Primetime Brian Lee. The Triple Threat I know the best came from, like, you know, later on, where it would be Shane Douglas, Chris Candido, and Bam Bam Bigelow. And then, of course, Lance Storm was kind of like a satellite member, where he, you know, because he ended up having to, can't remember the exact circumstance, but he ended up teaming with Chris Candido, and they hated each other. But they ended up winning the tag team titles, so, you know, he was kind of a part of the Triple Threat, but not exactly, and they were always feuding. So a thing they did a lot in ECW is tag teams feuding with each other. They did that with RVD and Sabu. They didn't like each other, but and storyline, obviously. But, you know, they would always find a way to win and hold on to the tag team titles. This was also the show where Rick Rude made his debut under a mask, but when he talked, it was Rick Rude. I think there was a reason he was hiding his... It might have been some contract thing with WCW, I don't know. But they weren't trying to hide the fact that it was Rick Rude. It was kind of like a wink-wink type thing. But he ended up announcing Shane Douglas' opponent for the night for the ECW Championship. And it was Pitbull #1 making his return. Of course, after he broke his neck and all that stuff, you know, he made his return. He ended up beating Shane Douglas by countout, and of course everybody came out to celebrate with Pitbull 1 making his return. But probably the biggest show of the month was WWF Royal Rumble, January 19th from San Antonio, Texas. This is the 10th annual Royal Rumble event, and on this event, WWF Intercontinental Champion Hunter Hearst Helmsley, you know, pre-Triple H, and even pre-China, he was out there with Mr. Hughes, which I don't remember him being with Mr. Hughes. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I don't remember that time. I remember, you know, the Blue Blood time, and then I remember when China joined him, which of course would happen this year. But I don't remember the Mr. Hughes. I guess he was definitely replaced. Mr. Hughes was always one of those ones, like, he was annoying to me. I don't know why. He always had the sleeveless, fancy white button-up shirt and pants. It's like, and he's like in almost every promotion. I don't remember if he was WCW, but I know he's ECW, and it's just like, just this boring bodyguard type guy, but he always looked just like a fat guy to me in a suit. But anyway, Triple H, pre-Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, get it right, retained his title, defeating Goldust with Marlena. And then the Royal Rumble actually wasn't the main event again. But Stone Cold actually won his very first Royal Rumble. He last eliminated Bret Hart, and there was kind of he entered 5th and lasted over 45 minutes. It was the longest one in there. Contrast that, Jerry Lawler only lasted 4 seconds. He got eliminated by Bret Hart quickly. But Austin was actually thrown over the top rope by Bret Hart, but the referees didn't see it because they were trying to break up a Mankind and Terry Funk brawl out on the floor after they got eliminated. But so anyway, because they only had the 2 referees out there, Austin got back in the ring and ended up eliminating the Vader, Undertaker, and then Bret Hart to win the Royal Rumble. Well, this is kind of the start of the because you know what happens at WrestleMania 13 if you're a wrestling fan. So this is kind of where the double turn kind of started. Obviously, Austin doing a heel thing there, you know, getting back into Rumble and winning when he didn't deserve it. But the next night on Raw, Bret Hart threw a fit and whined, which was his gimmick at the time, and now his real life gimmick. Bill Goldberg and all this other crap. But anyway, he whined WWF President Gorilla Monsoon to try to get him declared as a winner. He said no. Stone Cold is the winner. However, he's not getting the title shot. They're going to set up a Fatal 4-Way match. I don't remember if they called it Fatal 4-Way, or there was some kind of 4-way match at the next In Your House pay-per-view, which would be the next month. And it would be the final four people. I think this is what it was called, Final Four, because it was the final four people in that Rumble. You know, Austin, Bret, Undertaker, and Vader. Well, Bret Hart ended up winning that match and became, you know, the number one contender. But however, before we get to that, we want to talk about the main event of the Rumble show. Of course, being in San Antonio, they were in Shawn Michaels' hometown. He ended up defeating Psycho Sid to win the WWF title. And before we got to that Final Four match to see who would go on to face, you know, originally at the end of that Rumble, you're thinking, you know, if you just look at the results and don't look at anything else, you got Stone Cold wins a Rumble, Shawn Michaels is the champion. You're thinking, oh yeah, that's the year that Austin beat Shawn Michaels for the title. But wrong. That happens a year later. This does not happen. This match does not happen at WrestleMania. For obviously, I told you why with the four-way and then Bret Hart winning the match. But what would actually happen is 3 days before that Final Four event, on a special Thursday Night Raw, I think they're probably preempted by a dog show or something on USA like they used to be. Shawn Michaels just came out and gave his I lost my I can't even talk. I lost my smile speech. I can't say smile and speech together. You know, the hair hurt his knee, but all he talks about is losing his smile. And it was really, you know, the story is he didn't want to end up facing Bret at WrestleMania because, you know, Bret was going to win that match. You know, it's supposed to be a rematch. I think Bret was supposed to win the title back because, you know, Shawn had beaten Bret the year before. But of course, Shawn says it's because of his knee problems. But, you know, then he talks about losing his smile and not being happy or something, even though like he just won the title. Like, I don't know. It was definitely a bad time for Shawn. You know, I'm not a Shawn Michaels apologist. You know, during the times that he did things, although I'll always maintain that Bret did screw Bret. You know, he should have dropped the title. You know, at the end of the day, Vince owns the company. You're not a Canadian hero, Bret. Get over it. It wasn't like people were going to look at you any differently because you lost the title. He was just a whiny little baby, threw a fit, still throwing a fit, 30-something years later, whatever it is, 20-something. I'm old, so I don't know. Anyway, so anyway, back to the story. Shawn Michaels vacates the title because he lost his smile. So the match at the Final Four ends up, instead of being for a title shot at WrestleMania, it ends up being for the title. Like I said, Bret won, but then it was already determined before that the winner would face Sid the next night on Raw. So that's what happened. Bret faced Sid, and then Stone Cold ended up costing Bret the match and the title. And then somewhere, I can't remember how, but of course Undertaker ended up, I think, winning a number one contender match or something. That's how he ended up beating Sid for the title at WrestleMania. And, you know, the Bret and Stone Cold stuff that had started like a Survivor Series, and even a little bit before that, the year before in '96, really got ramped up. You know, he threw Bret out and won, even though he was already eliminated by Bret. He cost Bret the title. You know, they end up setting up a submission match at WrestleMania 13, which, of course, that match itself has been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Ken Shamrock gets put in as the special referee, and that was the night where basically Stone Cold turned into a good guy, Bret Hart turned into a bad guy. You know, Stone Cold never submitted and passed out because of the pain. Bret won, but then, you know, the next night, you know, Stone Cold gets cheered like crazy. Bret ends up getting booed and whining about everything, and, you know, we're off from there. And of course, it all culminates with the Survivor Series, the Montreal Screwjob, which I mentioned before in '97, and, you know, this is really where WWE or WWF at the time started to take off. And, you know, they were obviously being beaten by WCW at the time, which had their blunders, which I'll get into. Speaking of that, WCW Clash of the Champions happened from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, about a week before their pay-per-view, I think. But despite being a Clash of Champions, there was only one title match. Dean Malenko defeated WCW World Cruiserweight Champion Ultimate, as they called him, Ultimate Dragon. They would switch. Sometimes they call him Ultimate Dragon. Sometimes they call him his actual name, Ultimo Dragon. Anyway, he beat Ultimo Dragon for the title. And in the main event, Lex Luger defeated Scott Hall with Kevin Nash in 6 by DQ. Like I said, only one title match at Clash of the Champions. It was originally when that event started, every championship was on the line. And then, of course, later on, it just went on to be, a show that they didn't even treat as special as Nitro. It was almost like WCW Saturday Night, which they were treating like crap by this time. But speaking of the pay-per-view, WCW and NWO presents the very first sold out, January 25th from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This is the very first sold out and the first and only NWO branded pay-per-view. The NWO was in control of everything. Everything looked gritty. The commentators were Eric Bischoff and Ted DiBiase, and they did nothing but make fun of WCW the whole night. It was not well-received pay-per-view. I don't know what it was, but people were paying money for this thing, and it was like a half-assed. The NWO referee, Nick Patrick, was the ref for every match. The Steiner brothers ended up defeating WCW World Tag Team Champions, the Outsiders, to win the titles. When Nick Patrick had got knocked out in the match, and WCW ref Randy Anderson ran down and counted the pin. Well, the next night on he went to Raw after that. The next night on Nitro, it was a famous thing where Bischoff, who was the leader of the NWO basically, but he was also still the WCW president at this time. He ended up, in fact, I think this might have been what led to them taking him out of the WCW president role on screen. He obviously was the president of WCW, or whatever his title was, executive vice president. I don't know. I don't get all them titles and stuff. Anyway, the next night, Bischoff tries to get the ref Randy Anderson to reverse the decision because he wasn't supposed to be a ref. He refuses to do it, so he fires Randy Anderson and reverses the decision, giving the titles back to the Outsiders. And that was like a famous thing where, I think the next week Randy Anderson's wife and kids came on there and begged for his job back, and Bischoff just laughed, complete heel stuff. But like I said, I think that was the start of them coming out with a new president or person to run WCW or something. So that, because it looks stupid with Bischoff leading the NWO but also being over the WCW guys. It's kind of too much. But anyway, also on this sold out event, let me see, where was that? The main event, the match between WCW World Champion Hollywood Hogan and the Giant, ended in a no contest. You always love that at a pay-per-view, a main event. But Nick Patrick refused to count the 3 count for the Giant to win the title, so Giant chokeslammed him. And then the NWO hit the ring, and Giant chokeslammed all them one by one. But yeah, just convoluted WCW as always, but they were still on top of the wrestling world at this time. That NWO angle was hot before they completely watered it down. A couple other things to mention. During this month, the show from WWF debuted called Shotgun Saturday Night, which originally was this gritty, almost looked like an outlaw show where they would one week they were at this I think it was the Union train station or something, where I remember Undertaker, Triple H coming down the escalators fighting. There'd be some shows they would be wrestling in a bar. A really cool thing. They had Jim Cornette on commentary. Brian Pillman was on there a few times, Stone Cold. A really gritty type show. Definitely counterculture to anything WWF had done before that. The slick, polished shows in the arena, and everything is in its place. But on the Shotgun Saturday Night, it was meant to be crazy. It was on USA at 11 p.m. on Saturday nights. It eventually became what all the other ones became. Sunday Night Heat was big when it came out on MTV. It was also a lead into the pay-per-views, but it eventually became mostly highlights of Raw and matches recorded before Raw, where they would have a semi good wrestler face a no name, and that type of stuff. Like all the other shows, like I said, Heat, Velocity, Metal, Jacked. I remember when they came out with WWF Superstars. They brought that back. It was on WGN, and it was the 2010s WWE, somewhere in there, 2012 maybe, I don't know. But anyway, they put a lot of emphasis on that show, and then eventually it just became the same old syndicated, we don't care about these matches, we'll just put them on there. And I think it ended its run on online only. They kicked it off TV. It was doing so bad in the ratings. But anyway, there was one other title change. It happened January 4th at it was an IWGP show in Japan called Wrestling World 97. Jushin Thunder Liger defeated IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion Ultimo Dragon to win the title. So Ultimo Dragon lost 2 titles that month. He probably still had like 8 of them. I think he had like 10 at one time. I remember that being one of my favorite wrestlers because he went out with like 10 titles like over his shoulders. It was like the coolest thing ever. But anyway, I want to say a little bit about wrestling. That was a lot about wrestling. Sorry that took forever, but like a lot going on. You could tell a lot more going on in the wrestling world. Like if you look now and if you were to look at one 3 or 4 years earlier, you know, just so much moving around, and like that chaotic scene for the WWF, you know, could have been a nightmare, but it really got the ball rolling towards that Attitude Era that we all know and love. But anyway, I thank you guys for joining me so much. Next week we're on episode 61. Moving on. We're actually moving back in the past, you know, by a couple years. Episode 61 is going to go back to April of 1995. I was 11 at this time and in 5th grade, and this is actually my 6th trip through 1995, so we're going to be halfway through the year. And hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave me any comments you guys want to. Anything you want me to add to this. Anything you want me to subtract from this. Blah, blah, blah too much. You want me to talk more? I doubt that. But anyway, we'll see you next time.
And now, I predict the future. Next week, you'll be in the same time, same place, same station. For another hideous, hateful haul of horror.
Tales from the 90's never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and more in your